Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about some of the decisions that developers make that may get publishers very nervous. Some of these decisions happen very early in development, and it may be before a developer even ever speaks to a publisher. And often they have no idea that they created a problem. So, my name is Eline Muijres. I'm a freelance producer. I'm the founder of Cohop Games, which is my company where I provide freelance production services. And I'm also a lead producer at the PAL Group, where I manage multiple titles as a publisher-producer. And most recently at our brand new publishing label, Cohop Games. I've been in the industry for a while now. I live in beautiful Vienna in Austria. I work remotely with teams all over the globe. And besides my work as a producer, I also am a board member at Games for Diversity. It's a foundation, chairman with Menno over there. And I also want to add that I'm really happy to be back at INDIGO, because 10 years ago I worked at Dutch Game Garden, and our team organized INDIGO. It's always wonderful to be back and see how the event evolved over time. So here's a selection of games that I worked on. I worked on games for pretty much all platforms, such as PC, consoles, mobile, and also various genres like adventure, strategy, puzzle, and RPGs. And I worked as a developer-producer for many years in very tiny teams of like 3 people, but also a studio of like 50 people. And some of these titles were developed and completely self-published. And some other games were done as work for hire, or as licensed games, or applied games even. And also some were developed together with a publisher. And as I said, I'm currently a publisher-producer, so it's been very interesting to also work on the other side and work with developers all over the world to ship their games. Today I'm going to walk you through several scenarios, several types of habits or decisions that developers make that can make collaboration with a publisher very tricky, or could even make publishers hesitate and reject a deal. And these are things that may not always be so obvious to you as a developer, but they can have downstream consequences. And before we continue, I need to give you a disclaimer. Everything I share today is based on real situations I've encountered in my work, and obviously a lot of these situations are confidential. So I'm not naming anyone, and I also changed some specific details as well. And this should go without saying, but no publisher is the same. And their contracts and their processes and their way of working can vary greatly. Some of the examples I give may be no problem for one publisher and then also be a huge red flag to another. Also please know that this is just my perspective. It's not the one single truth. Things are often a lot more nuanced. And there's also usually not one solution to a problem. So, before a publisher signs with a developer, there's a vetting process that they go through to decide if they want to work. To decide what they want, if they want to work with you. And it's essentially a structured look at everything. So I'm talking about the game, the team, the finances, the plan, basically the whole picture. And publishers will typically ask for things like a current build, game design document maybe, a budget overview, your team structure, so who's actually part of your team, and a development roadmap as well. And when the publisher is evaluating your game, they are also evaluating you. And the game can be brilliant, and it still might not be enough if the team behind it raises red flags during this vetting process. And to name an example, think about how you behave during meetings. Are you responsive? Are you clear? When a publisher asks a hard question about your budget or your scope, do you engage openly with that, or do you get defensive? That communication style usually doesn't change after signing, and a team that's difficult to get information out of during the pitch is a team that could go quiet months into development, for example, or a team that gets very defensive about feedback that they get in a pitch meeting is also a team that could be may not be willing to adapt to a situation or to a play test that happened or to the market in general. So yeah, your documentation also tells a story. And a well-maintained game design document, a credible roadmap, a realistic budget, basically say, okay, this team knows how to run a project. But if you give vague answers and sloppy documents, then that says something else. Not necessarily that the game is bad or anything, or that this is a deal breaker, but what it tells me is that the team behind this game might be harder to work with, and well, there will be a lot of mentoring involved from the publishing people to supplement that, so to say. So yeah, what I want to say is that what we're looking for isn't perfection, and it also depends, of course, on the stage that your project is in, because if you are in pre-production, then I'm not going to expect that you know absolutely everything about your game. But what we're looking for and what we're trying to read between the lines is whether you, as a developer, have a realistic grip on your own project. And yeah, that means, do you know where you are, what things cost, what you already committed to? And when something feels off in that process, it raises questions and sometimes even red flags. And those can cost you a deal. So the first example I would call the commitment trap. And that's what happens when the commitments that you make pile up and interfere with the development of your game later on. So the example I have here is about a developer that ran a really successful Kickstarter before they approached a publisher. And that went really well. They built a community, they got funding, people were excited. But the campaign also included backer rewards, which is, very normal. But the rewards in this case weren't only merchandise or exclusive build access, though, I must say that there were a lot of physical rewards. And I know that there are plenty of Kickstarter experts around that warn against physical rewards, and that they certainly, certainly shouldn't be underestimated. But in this case, those were actually not the problem. The problem was that there were rewards that were in-game assets. So, for example, backers could have their own custom characters walking around as NPCs in the game world, or shown as portraits on the wall, or they could have their names displayed somewhere in the game. And there was even a reward that let a backer design their own mini-boss. And, well, yeah. So, because this campaign was so successful, they sold hundreds of these kinds of rewards. And of course, it came from a very good place. And the developer also felt like, okay, this is a way to have the community be more involved with the game. But by the time I joined the project, those decisions were baked in, and it wasn't even a real topic until we looked closer at the scope of the game, and then we realized, okay, this is an enormous commitment that the team had made, and we actually needed to reduce scope in this situation. But we couldn't just cut some assets because, there was a real person attached to it. It was someone that actually paid money for this and had been following the game for years. Those weren't just fans, they were super fans. And when we wanted to reduce the scope, we ran into this wall. It actually wasn't something that the developer thought was a problem, because from their perspective, it was easy to just create these assets. It's not very complicated. This way they could include the community more with the development. But from our side, we kind of inherited this problem that we didn't cause. And there are, of course, all sorts of problems that can turn out, during game development. And experience teaches you that you need to be careful about what you lock in, because you're going to get in trouble later. You might have to cut some levels or characters or even features. And I do want to be clear, a successful Kickstarter is absolutely a great thing to have, because you basically have a validated concept now. But publishers know also that these rewards, like those kind of rewards, make you less flexible, and that also adds risk to the project. So the principle here is a promise that you make to your community can also be a future production constraint. And before you offer something, please try to ask yourself, okay, how much time does this take from my team, and how important it is? Is this, avoidable if you're in a crisis situation, for example? The second topic is related, but it's also a little bit more subtle because it's about what can happen when your audience knows a lot about your game already before you even talk to a publisher. So this developer had been building their game in public for years, and it wasn't just posting screenshots or streaming development. They were actually sharing mechanics, they were sharing lore, characters, also prototype builds, and they had a dedicated fan base and also a Patreon, a wiki, fan art, that kind of stuff. And yeah, basically they had very real community investment in the story and the characters in particular. And that is super cool. But yeah, building that kind of audience, of course, it takes a lot of work, and they were also very good at it. However, when we got on the project and we sat down to look at the script together, we could see fairly quickly that there were sections that were not going to survive the production reality of the budget that we agreed on. You should think about scenes that were really beautifully written, but they were very expensive with lots of characters at the same time in the scene, custom animations that were needed. And also the story was really, really elaborate with many elements that were completely intertwined. So, for example, the characters referred in conversations to very specific, super custom environment assets. And at the same time, the VO was already recorded. So making that conversation take place in a different environment, a different location, was not really possible. And in a normal situation, this is where you balance the creative decisions with the scope and the budget, and you work through that together, and you find solutions. Maybe some cutscenes are removed, or a character gets a different kind of presence in the game. But we couldn't really have that conversation freely because, those characters had entire fan communities. There was a lot of fan art made of those characters. Of course, people shipping characters together. So cutting those characters or changing them felt like breaking a promise to an audience that actually had been following this game for years. And here as well, it's really, really amazing to have a community that is so involved and so, I would say building in public definitely was worth it, but it also came with a price. So what I want to say is that building in public trades flexibility for community. It can be a good strategy, but make sure that you understand that trade. And you need to be upfront with anyone that you want to work with about what that means. Please know what you're giving away and be transparent about it with a potential publisher. Now, this one is about a design decision that was completely intentional, but that a publisher could flag as a commercial problem. So in this situation, a developer had built a prologue for their game. And in this case, the prologue, the game actually started at a crisis point at the end of the story. So you start the game and, okay, we're in a crisis situation. It's the end of the story, basically, and you don't know what happened. And the idea was to create mystery. So we drop the player into this world. We make them curious about what's going on. And basically, we make them want more of this. And I also really understand the thought process here because it's a very cinematic approach. But the problem was how it was executed. And the prologue started at the end of the game, so that meant that characters weren't really properly introduced. They were just there. They were in the middle of this crisis situation that the player had no context for at all. And another problem was that the full battle system was available to the player, and you also had access to all the skills of the main character, because, you know, you're at the end of the story, so, you know, you're very powerful. But there was also no tutorial at all, because the mechanics would actually be properly introduced in the next chapter, chapter 1, after the prologue. So you have all these attacks and all these options, and then no idea what any of it means. And because it started at the end, there was also no emotional investment in any of this either. So the player doesn't know these characters, or they don't know this fantasy world either. So they don't care about them yet. Like if I would tell you, like, okay, you know, there's this galaxy far, far away, and there's like John and Jane, you don't care about them. Like, who are they? So yeah, the mystery here didn't feel intriguing. It actually just felt confusing. And yeah, the whole thing also took half an hour, and the pacing made it feel really, really slow and tedious to go through. So yeah, when we looked at this prologue, we could see a very high risk of players potentially refunding this game. And the developer thought, hey, this is mysterious, this is exciting, people would be curious, they want to keep playing to find out more. But what the developer didn't realize is that you're not actually presenting your game to your fans in this phase, you're presenting it to strangers. Because this is the part where you have to convince people who have never played your game, who don't know your worlds, basically who don't care about your game yet, to keep playing. And I know that, you know, a fan will just push through this confusion because they already love what you're making. And the thing is, a stranger just won't, because they just try it out for a while, maybe 10 minutes if you're lucky, and then they just quit playing and they press, they want to refund because it's not interesting enough, they don't know what's going on. And this is something that a publisher can see coming, right? And they might flag this. On the other side, it could also be that they think, okay, I'm super confused. They're super confused in their play session, and then turn down the game because of that. And yeah, basically, what I'm saying is that first impressions matter. And your prologue, your demo, your first hour are not for the people who already know and love you, but they are for the people who have never heard of you. And those people you need to convince to keep playing. So far, all these decisions that were decisions that developers actively made. So this one is about a decision that you probably don't realize that you're making, and it comes from something that I see a lot in a lot of indie teams, that, you know, they make a decision early on to stay lean, and they don't actually even think of it as a decision. Basically, there's the vibe of like, okay, we don't want complicated processes, we don't want heavy project management tools, we basically don't want corporate bullshit. They're just a small team, they know the game inside out, and they are moving fast and they trust each other. So it's just, you know, small team, very flexible. And that absolutely can work and feel right. But the problem is that at some point, someone is going to ask you to prove what you actually know. So yeah, in this situation, during the vetting process, I mean, during the vetting process, publishers usually ask for a plan, right? A budget, a roadmap, milestone breakdown, that kind of stuff. And most teams can produce something that looks like a plan. And I had a team that was working on their first game. And the more I worked with them, the clearer it became that the developer had no real proper processes or pipelines or so. There was no task tracking at all. And people were just working on whatever felt most urgent to them at that day. And there also wasn't really shared visibility on any of it. Nobody knew really, like, there was no central point of communication where people could see, this is what was done and this is what remains. And their workflows were also very unusual and inefficient. And also a lot of game documentation was missing. It was basically scattered across like different Dropbox and Drive folders. And yeah, then what was also shocking is that some team members just stopped working entirely when they were blocked, or they wait for feedback, and just like, they down all the tools, and it's like, okay, I don't know what to do. So yeah, and I also later found out that there were even people that had done almost no work at all for months, and they were still being paid. So they started to fill milestones. And when I asked questions and I tried to find out what was going on, they didn't seem to be so worried. The developers kept telling me, oh, yeah, we're almost done. And yeah, they can finish the game in a few months. And all I saw in the build, actually, were some blockout levels. And I was like, this doesn't match what they're saying and what, huh? Yeah, they were very confident. And yeah, they said, yeah, now all the work that's left, that's very quick to finish, it's very easy, we know how to do it. But when I tried to get underneath that confidence and ask, okay, then tell me, how much is actually left? What does done mean to you? And how do you know? And then they couldn't really tell me that because they didn't actually know. They had no way of knowing that because they had no system of knowing that. They never really quantified their work and properly estimated it. And if you have never actually quantified your work, meaning that you never broke it down task by task and asset by asset, and then estimate it properly, so just put a number of days or story points or whatever system you want to use to it, and then track that against the time and budget that you have, then what you're handing over, if you didn't do that, is basically a confident guess. And this doesn't get caught immediately. Because a document, a plan can basically pass the first check, and it doesn't really get caught immediately, but it can get you into big trouble later. So now I'm a producer, right? So I need to tell you, like, please track your work. But what's actually most concerning to me is that the developer decided that, our gut feeling is enough for such an important contract, a publishing contract. So they thought they knew their game so well that they didn't really need to measure it. And on top of that, they went into a contract that legally bound them to commit to that. So I really don't want to scare people, but I really had to educate the developers on this, because in the worst case, you can get sued if you do not deliver what you promised. So what we see when we look at that situation from the outside, and especially when it starts to unravel, is a team that doesn't know what they don't know. And that's a really dangerous position to be in, because you cannot flag a risk that you haven't seen, right? You cannot ask for help for a problem that you don't know that you have. And before you talk to a publisher, please ask yourself, do you actually know what you don't know? Are there unknown parts in your designs? Are there gaps in your workflows or pipelines? Is there any uncertainty in your estimates and planning? Or in your budgets? Is there still something that you need to figure out there? I'm basically not saying that you need to figure out all of that on your own, because there are also people that can help you with that. But if everything is smokes and mirrors, then yeah, publishers will eventually find out. And at that point, the conversation gets very difficult. So in all these situations, none of the developers were actually trying to cause a problem. They just made decisions without thinking about how those decisions play out later. And I want to encourage you to ask yourself these questions as you prepare to talk to publishers. The first two are about things that you may have already set in motion without realizing it. Have you made any promises that you cannot undo? Is there anything that you have not mentioned because it didn't occur to you that it actually matters. And the third one is harder, of course. Can you actually see your project from the outside? You may need to have a second pair of eyes for that, and because if you're this deep in, it's really hard to predict a first impression, right? And finally, do you know what you don't know? And yeah, do you know where the gaps are, the unknowns that you still need to figure out? And if so, what is your plan for getting those answers? And yeah, I hope that I gave you something to think about here. A publisher might ask these questions, but it's better if you do that first. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have time for one teeny tiny question. Does anybody in the room have a teeny tiny question for Eline? Right now? Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I was wondering how you break the catch-22 of not having any experience with the publishing process and then, needing that to get experience in that same process.
Not having experience is not necessarily a problem because you can also ask people who do have the experience to help you. Sometimes, you need to free up some budget for that because if you really want someone to properly help you, it's usually not free, but there are so many resources out there. I think the Dutch Games Association also has like a really nice list on their website with lots of information and links, and their developer communities that you can also ask. So you can absolutely have a second pair of eyes on your production plan or your budget, or your pitch deck, for example, to say, hey, does this actually make sense, what I'm presenting here?